local authority. Boy, Steven Adams, he has just been a completely different player here. Nice steal. Adams, once he caught the pass, it was over.
Welcome back, guys. We're continuing our look-back series of a variety of different great performances by Thunder players throughout the season. And we've got one that came just after the All-Star break this year. It was a 113-101 victory at a rockin' Chesapeake Energy Arena. And, guys, Steven Adams really was front and center in this game. There was a huge win for the Thunder right before the All-Star break where Adams had a half-court heave that really got the bench rocking. But in this game, he was just dominant on both ends of the floor, 19 points, 17 boards. What stood out to you about the way Steven played in this matchup against Denver?
Well, the way he finished, Nick, the way the team finished, it was tied after three quarters against the Nuggets, a team that, frankly, has had the Thunder's number over the last handful of years for whatever reason. Now, obviously, they've ascended. They've become a better team. They're a borderline contending team in the Western Conference. But this game was there to be had. The Thunder had struggled against the Nuggets, and they just dominated that fourth quarter at both ends. Steven had 10 of his 19 points in the fourth quarter, 5 of his 17 rebounds in the fourth. He also had a big block shot down the stretch. So I think that when you look at one individual in this game, Steven stands out. But this was an incredible team performance. This is one of 22 efforts on the season where they had at least 6 in double figures. This was one of a handful with 7 in doubles. They did a really good job disrupting Denver's offense, forcing 19 turnovers, and closed the game strong for the 12-point win. I think this was kind of a statement victory by the Thunder out of the All-Star break that I think really uplifted spirits and put this team in a great frame of mind for what was to come the remainder of February into March.
Yeah, Matt, to follow up your point, I mean, the Nuggets had swept the Thunder last year, had won the earlier meeting back in December in Denver, and one of the reasons why is Nikola Jokic. I mean, Nikola Jokic was killing the Thunder pretty consistently, and I think that this was one of those games where Steven Adams kind of said, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to actually make my imprint on this game, and he did it with the activity on the glass first and foremost. The offensive rebounds, he had 7. Denver as a team had 8. And that limited Denver a lot of what they could do, get out in transition. It limited Denver in their second chance opportunities, something that had really hurt the Thunder in a lot of those close games down the stretch. But Steven Adams, I think, personally took it upon himself this game to say, hey, look, I've had enough of Nikola Jokic kind of taking advantage of me throughout these last few contests. And it really showed up because he did finish that game. He had an excellent fourth quarter. He was consistent from start to finish. And like you said, Matt, I mean, this was an important game coming out of the All-Star break. They played Denver for the second consecutive year, first game back, and I think it set the tone for the second half.
As you said, Chris, Steven really wore down Jokic at the end of that game. Mike, what do you notice about the way that Steven just physically made Jokic have to deal with him all game long?
Well, first of all, Nick, I think you brought up a good point talking about this kind of play started from Steven Adams before the All-Star break. Now, there's always a big drop-off from all teams' first game after the All-Star break. And I think Chris Paul said it, that night, look, we want to come out swinging. We want to get off on the right start. And Adams was one of those guys I thought, who was the key catalyst, in getting them off to a good start for the first game of the second half of the season. Now here's more of what I'm talking about. With Adams, I mean, he needed a game like this against Jokic, right? Just follow me on this, man. Jokic is just tearing up the league. He's eating up everybody. He's knocking down threes. He's posting up. He's getting to the free throw line. He's doing all this freakish stuff, for a 7-footer, all right? Because, he's one of those guys that, you just said, all right, he's a triple-double machine. He had 9 or 10 up until that point. So for Adams, and I'm gonna go back to your point, that you brought up, Chris. He needed to have that kind of a game against Jokic because he's that good. Because he's that kind of a guy where, he's not gonna chest beat you. He's just gonna beat you down. Same way every time. It's coming. And then all of a sudden, Adams says, "Nah, on this particular night, we're gonna do something different. You're gonna have to deal with me." And I thought that that's what really shocked Denver over the course of 4 quarters. And then, like you pointed out, Matt, final quarter, Adams gets 10 of his 19 points in the fourth when it counted to most. Now, keep in mind, too, Denver was second best in the West at the time. They came into that game that night, 21 games over 500. So you had to be second in the West, and you had to stay above 500, what the Thunder already were at 22-16. That's how you came out of that game. And Mr. Adams was certainly the man of the night.
It appeared to me that it was by design, guys, that it's not like you come in and secede whatever Jokic is going to wind up getting. He still scored 32 points. But what the Thunder did was they minimized, aside from he and Murray, what the Nuggets did around them. They had 3 guys in double figures that night. Murray scored 21. Jokic had 32, but only 4 in the fourth quarter. He took only 2 shots in the fourth quarter. So he was, as you pointed out, Nick, kind of ground down by the fourth quarter physically by what Adams had done on the backboard and just his physicality overall. And then Murray made 1 of 4 shots in the fourth quarter. So the Thunder, as the game wore on, did a better job of tightening the screws against what was working for the Nuggets, where they minimized the other Nuggets around their star players. 6 of 27 3-point shooting for Denver that night, and minimizing the impact that Jokic and Murray would have on the scoreboard in that fourth quarter, I thought were outstanding strategic ploys by the Thunder, and they really executed them well. When Adams is engaged, we've talked about this often during the course of the season on both TV and radio, this team is really difficult to beat. As Billy Donovan says all the time, we take it to another level. When Steven impacts the game at this volume in terms of numbers and physically wearing down the opposition, this team becomes much tougher to deal with.
I love the word you use there, engaged, Matt. And he really kept Jokic engaged all game, not just the scoring and the rebounding, but passing too. He had a nice lob up to Danilo Gallinari for a dunk, some handoff passes to the guards to attack off the bounce. And then that left Jokic pretty lazy for that driving dunk when Jokic just bailed on the switch there. And so that all led to Denver's only division loss of the entire season. So something the Thunder can definitely be proud of. That engagement is something that we saw when Steven was healthy all season long. He played fewer minutes this year. What stood out to you about his season as a whole? Mike, I want to start with you.
Oh, when you keep raising your numbers each year, you say, okay, how high can you go? And, I think the expectations continue to rise. And I thought that when Steven came into this year, it's a different squad. I mean, he's with 8, he's got 8 new faces on the team, all right? So he's making that adjustment now of how to play with CP3, how to play with Shea, how to play with Danilo, on and on and on. It just continues. And I think one of the biggest adjustments for a big man is that, you're dealing with a point guard who's a little bit different. CP3 throws a different, what I call alley-oop than what, say, Russ did, or, any other player for that matter. And you have to make that adjustment and, getting your hands ready. CP3 passes come a little bit different. Hey, man, I don't know when CP3 is going to throw a pass, right? I just say, get your hands by your face, Mr. Adams. And, and making that adjustment in the first half of the season, I thought he did that, maybe the first quarter of the season. But by the time the Thunder got to the halfway point, Adams was already in gear. Now, he suffered, an injury in the first part of the season that kind of slowed him up, Nick. But after a while, I thought once he got going and got into the rhythm, we saw a lot of that 10 games before he had that magnificent hurl of a shot right before the All-Star break against New Orleans. Coming out of the break, man, he put the pedal to the metal, having a big, massive game against Jokic. That physical play, the rebounding, maybe his offensive rebounding wasn't where it was over the last couple of seasons, but I think he's got help now. He's got guys, he's playing less minutes. Sometimes less is more, and I think Adams benefited from that this year.
Now, Mike, if there's one thing that I've learned, it's that I know that you like a selfish Steven Adams, right?
That's right.
You like a selfish Steven Adams. I like an unselfish Steven Adams, and that's something that we saw from him this year. And just sort of the expanding of his game, something that Billy Donovan and the coaching staff kind of challenged him at the beginning was his ability to create offense. And a lot of that came from the high post and just those threaded passes to slashing guys from the wing, his ability to find guys getting to the rim and creating from the top of the key. That was something that we didn't see a whole lot of in years past from Steven Adams, but we always kind of knew that he had it in his game. And I think that we saw that more this year than any other year because he had that freedom. He had the ability to step outside, even though he was still expected to set screens, those big wide body screens that no defensive player wanted to have to fight over. But I know you guys noticed that unselfish Steven Adams.
Well, we saw
it's
a little
rare,
bit more
guys.
It's Kiwi step a little bit this year too, though.
It's rare that we see Steven celebrate on the floor. He did twice this year. He drew 2 charges, first 2 of his career. So, look, a lot of people got on him early in the season. The offensive rebounding numbers were down by design. This team was totally focused from the outset of training camp on transition defense. That is, you do what you do offensively, then you fall back. And they led the league in fewest fast break points allowed. So it's not on Steven that his offensive rebounding numbers are down. Billy Donovan's message is, unless you know you've got a clear path to go get that and throw it down on the follow, you're falling back. Second thing is the Thunder moved to drop coverage, which meant the big man's not chasing around guards on the perimeter switching. He's falling back to anchor the defense. We saw Steven's block shot numbers go up. His physical deterrent aspects of his game became more prevalent as well. So I think when we talk about Michael, the adjustment he made, it wasn't just to the personnel, it was to 2 specifically different schemes that involved him at both ends of the floor this season. And I thought he did a really good job of that. It's clear when he is physically hindered, the minimal minutes that he played, less than 30 on average a game, I think will really benefit him come playoff time. Whereas in past years, I think we could see the number of minutes took a toll on him because he never pulls up. He's always playing full out.
I'm glad that you mentioned playoff time, Matt, because Steven is a guy who played so well at home, 63% from the field at home, 12.5 points this season. On March 11th, the Thunder had a chance to take a home court spot, the 4th seed in the Western Conference, and that's where this season left off. As you map on to what Steven was going to look like, Chris, I want to get your take first. What was his impact going to be in the playoffs this year?
Well, as long as he was healthy, as you said, he was a completely different player when he was healthy. And the word that I think that we used throughout the season, Michael and I, was when he had lift, he was a completely different player. When he had the lift to impact the game. And his field goal percentage historically was better in the postseason than it was in the regular season. And I think that we were all looking forward to seeing a healthy Steven Adams because, as you guys said, he only played 27 minutes a game this year in those 58 games, which was 6 minutes less than the previous season. So I think that we were all pretty excited to see what he was going to bring to the table.
Well, I think, in the playoffs, obviously he's been there many times before. Being a former big man in this league, the first thing you say to yourself when you get there, all right, I know what I didn't do last year or the year before that I want to do differently. I'm smarter. I'm not necessarily stronger. I'm mature. I got more experience under my belt. And I think that's the biggest thing that Adams brings is that maturity and experience and stability that we were starting to see in that second half of the season.
All about matchups, guys. It depends on who the Thunder draw and whether or not that's a team that plays 5 out versus one anchor to sort of establish things inside. If that's the case, Adams, I think, will play bigger minutes and he'll have a bigger role in what the Thunder do at both ends. If they play a 5-out team like the Rockets, I'll be curious to see the way Billy Donovan goes in terms of strategy personnel-wise.
We know that Steven is battle-tested, 52 career playoff games. He's seen just about every squad you can imagine. Guys, thanks so much for joining me to talk about the Big Kiwi.